What I'm about to share may completely change how you think about lowering your blood pressure. Because the truth is, most seniors are trying to fix the wrong problem. They focus on cutting salt, avoiding certain foods, taking their medication exactly as prescribed. And yet their numbers stay stubbornly high. Not because they're failing, and not because their body is broken, but because no one ever explained one simple thing. Blood pressure control is not just about what you remove. It's also about what your body is missing. There's one key mineral that helps your blood vessels relax and helps your body get rid of excess sodium naturally. And most people are not getting enough of it. In fact, when I reveal food number 1, the one that surprises almost everyone, you'll understand why so many people do everything right and still don't see results. Stay with me, because this might change what ends up on your plate this week. Comment 1 if you're ready to rethink your blood pressure starting today. I'm Dr. Lauren Hayes, and after more than 20 years working with patients managing high blood pressure, I've learned something that often gets overlooked. Most people are told to reduce sodium, and that advice is absolutely important. But what's rarely explained is that lowering blood pressure is not just about cutting things out, it's also about restoring balance inside the body. One of the most important nutrients involved in that balance is potassium. Here's why it matters. Potassium works in direct opposition to sodium. While sodium tends to make your body hold on to water and tighten blood vessels, potassium helps your body release excess sodium through urine and supports the relaxation of blood vessel walls. When your blood vessels are more relaxed, blood can flow more easily. That means your heart doesn't have to push as hard, and your blood pressure naturally begins to move in a healthier direction. This isn't a quick fix or overnight miracle. It's a physiological process that improves when your daily eating pattern supports it consistently. However, I need to pause here for an important safety note. Increasing potassium is not appropriate for everyone. If you have kidney disease, certain heart conditions, or take medications that affect potassium levels, too much potassium can become dangerous. That's why everything I'm sharing today is meant for those whose doctor has confirmed that potassium is safe for them. When used correctly, in the right context, and as part of a balanced diet, potassium-rich foods can become one of the most powerful tools to support healthier blood pressure naturally. Let me tell you about someone named Evelyn, because her story explains this better than any chart or lab result ever could. Evelyn was 71 years old, disciplined, careful, and doing what most people would consider everything right. She had cut back on salty snacks, stopped adding salt to her meals, and even started walking after dinner most nights. But her blood pressure? It stayed higher than expected. And over time, that created something I see often: frustration. Not just mild frustration, but the kind that makes you question whether your effort even matters. So we took a closer look at what she was actually eating day to day. Yes, she had reduced sodium. That part was true. But something else stood out immediately. Her meals had become empty. Not in calories, but in nutrients, especially potassium. In trying so hard to avoid the bad, she had unknowingly removed many of the foods that help the body stay balanced. That's when everything started to make sense. Because blood pressure isn't just about restriction. It's about balance. And in Evelyn's case, her diet had become low in sodium, but also low in the very nutrients her body needed to function properly. That realization is what brings us to the first food I want you to understand, because it's one of the easiest to overlook and one of the easiest to fix. The first food I want you to focus on is something many people underestimate: cooked spinach. And I want to be very clear here, because this is where most people get it wrong. I'm not talking about a few raw leaves sitting on the side of your plate, or a decorative salad you barely touch. I'm talking about real, cooked spinach, prepared in a way that actually delivers meaningful nutrition. Here's why that matters. When spinach is cooked, it shrinks significantly in volume. That means you can eat a practical portion without feeling overwhelmed, while still getting a concentrated amount of potassium and other nutrients. In other words, it becomes easier to eat enough of it for your body to benefit. And for many seniors, this matters more than people realize. Appetite changes. Chewing can be more difficult. Large portions can feel discouraging. Cooked spinach solves that problem. It's soft, easy to eat, and incredibly flexible. You can add it to eggs, mix it into soups, fold it into stews, or serve it as a simple side dish with olive oil and garlic. No complicated recipes, no expensive ingredients, just simple, practical food. Another advantage is that spinach gives you a savory option. Many people assume they need to rely on fruit for potassium, but that often pushes them toward more sugar or sweet snacks than they actually want. Spinach gives you a completely different path, one that fits naturally into balanced meals. This is exactly what Evelyn started doing. Not extreme changes, not massive portions, just small, consistent additions. She added cooked spinach to her dinners a few times a week, sometimes with eggs, sometimes in soup, sometimes as a side with chicken or fish. Within a few weeks, her meals began to look different. More color, more nutrients, more balance. Did spinach alone fix her blood pressure? No. And that's important to understand. But it became one of the key pieces that helped shift her routine from simple restriction to real support for her cardiovascular system. But spinach alone isn't enough, because there's another problem most people don't even realize they have. And it quietly pushes blood pressure back up, no matter how careful they try to be. That problem is this: they eat meals that don't truly satisfy them. So what happens next? They snack. They reach for crackers, canned soup, processed bread, or whatever is quick and easy. And without realizing it, sodium starts creeping back into their day. That's why food number 2 is so important, because it doesn't just add potassium. It changes how you eat for the rest of the day. Food number 2 is beans, especially potassium-rich options like white beans. And I can't overstate how powerful they are when used correctly. Because beans don't just bring potassium. They bring fiber. They bring real staying power. Which means when you eat them, you feel full. And you stay full. And that one shift can change everything. Let me tell you about Frank. Frank was 74, living alone, and like many people, he thought he was eating reasonably well. Breakfast was toast. Lunch was a sandwich with deli meat. Dinner was often canned soup or a frozen meal. Nothing extreme. Nothing that seemed obviously wrong. But his blood pressure told a different story. Because his meals had one thing in common. They were built around convenience foods. And those foods were loaded with sodium and almost empty of potassium. He wasn't overeating. He wasn't careless. He was just stuck in a pattern that worked against him. So we didn't overhaul everything overnight. We made one simple change. A few times a week, he replaced part of his meal with beans. Sometimes it was a bowl of white beans with olive oil and herbs. Sometimes beans added to a salad. Sometimes a homemade soup where beans replaced the salty base. Simple, practical, repeatable. And something interesting happened. He stopped feeling hungry late at night. He stopped reaching for salty snacks. His meals became more satisfying, without becoming more complicated. And over time, his blood pressure trend began to shift. That's the hidden power of beans. They don't just add something healthy. They remove the need for something harmful. And that's what most people miss. Blood pressure doesn't improve just because you add one good food. It improves when your entire pattern starts to change. And beans help create that pattern. They naturally pair with vegetables. They work in soups, stews, and simple meals. They replace processed foods without making your life harder. And if you choose low-sodium options, or rinse canned beans, you can avoid turning a healthy food into a sodium problem. So this isn't about perfection. It's about building meals that actually support your body and keep you from falling back into old habits later in the day. Now we come to food number 1. And this is where most people get it completely wrong. In fact, this is the food people argue with me about the most. Because somewhere along the way, it was labeled as something to avoid. Food number 1 is a baked potato with the skin on, and I know that's not what many of you expected to hear. So let me be very clear. I'm not talking about French fries. I'm not talking about chips. And I'm definitely not talking about potatoes covered in butter, cheese, bacon, and salt. I'm talking about a simple, whole-baked potato, prepared in a way that supports your body instead of working against it. Because when you keep it simple, a potato becomes one of the most overlooked potassium-rich foods you can eat. And more importantly, It's a food people will actually eat consistently. Let me tell you about Louise. She was 69, very health conscious, and completely afraid of carbohydrates. She had convinced herself that anything starchy was the enemy. So she avoided potatoes, avoided beans, even limited fruit. But here's the problem. While she was avoiding those foods, she was still relying on processed, low-fat options that were quietly high in sodium and low in real nutrition. Her diet looked healthy on the surface, but underneath, it was unbalanced. And her blood pressure stayed high. That's when we made a simple shift. We stopped treating whole foods like the problem and started focusing on what actually was. Highly processed food, excess sodium, and lack of real nutrients. She began adding a baked potato a few times a week, not as a cheat meal, not as something to feel guilty about, but as a strategic part of her plate, paired with protein, paired with vegetables. And something interesting happened. She felt full. She stopped craving processed snacks, and her meals finally started working for her, instead of against her. That's the key most people miss. A good food doesn't just add nutrients. It replaces worse choices. And when that happens consistently, your entire eating pattern changes. So no, potatoes are not the enemy. When prepared correctly, they can be one of the smartest foods you add to your routine. Comment 1 if this food surprised you the most. Now here's where most people get confused. They hear about a healthy food, and they try to add it on top of everything else they're already doing. They eat spinach at dinner, but still have canned soup for lunch. They add beans, but finish the day with crackers and processed snacks. They eat a baked potato, but cover it with salt, butter, and packaged sauces. And then they wonder why nothing changes. Because blood pressure doesn't respond to one food. It responds to the overall pattern. Think of it this way. If you're pressing the gas pedal and the brake at the same time, you're not going anywhere. That's exactly what happens when you add potassium-rich foods, but keep a high-sodium, processed diet. You're helping your body and hurting it at the same time. That's why I don't want you thinking in terms of magic foods. There is no single food that fixes everything. What works is a pattern. More potassium, less sodium, more real food, less processed convenience, meals that satisfy you, so you don't go searching for something else later. Because here's the truth most people don't hear. Blood pressure doesn't change because of one perfect meal. It changes because your body sees a different pattern, day after day. Small improvements, repeated consistently, begin to stack. And when they stack for weeks and months, your numbers often begin to reflect that change. So don't aim for perfection. Aim for direction. Because the goal isn't to eat perfectly for one day. The goal is to build a way of eating your body can rely on. Now let me show you what this actually looks like in a real day. Because information is helpful, but practical action is what creates change. Breakfast could be something simple. Eggs with cooked spinach, and maybe a piece of fruit on the side. Nothing complicated. Nothing expensive. Just a meal that gives your body what it needs to start the day. For lunch, you might have a bean-based meal. A simple salad with white beans, vegetables, olive oil, and a source of protein. Filling, balanced, and much lower in sodium than most convenience foods. Then for dinner, grilled fish or chicken, a baked potato with the skin on, and more vegetables. That's it. No extreme diet, no trendy superfoods, just real food, used strategically. And here's what matters most. That kind of day naturally increases potassium, while reducing the space for sodium-heavy foods. You don't have to force it. You don't have to obsess over every detail. You just build better meals and let the pattern do the work. Because when eating feels normal, not restrictive, you're far more likely to stick with it. Now, before we finish, there's something very important I need to say. Because this is where people can make serious mistakes, even with good intentions. Do not use this video as a reason to stop your blood pressure medication on your own. I've seen people eat better for a week, feel encouraged, and then assume they no longer need treatment. And that can be dangerous because blood pressure doesn't always show symptoms. Damage can still be happening silently. If your numbers improve, that's great. But any changes to medication should always be made with your doctor, based on real measurements, not guesswork. And there's another group who needs to be especially careful. If you have kidney disease, reduced kidney function, or conditions that affect potassium levels, increasing potassium too quickly can actually be harmful. The same applies if you're taking certain medications, like potassium-sparing diuretics. That's why this approach is not about blindly adding more potassium. It's about using food wisely, in the right context, for the right person. And one of the most powerful things you can do is track your response. Check your blood pressure at home. Write it down. Pay attention to what you eat and how your numbers respond over time, because patterns tell the truth. You may notice your numbers rise after restaurant meals or improve when you cook more at home. That kind of awareness turns vague advice into something real and measurable. Now, here's what I want you to take away from everything you've heard today. You are not powerless when it comes to your blood pressure. Even now, in your 60s, 70s, or beyond, your daily choices still matter because your blood pressure doesn't exist on its own. It lives inside an environment shaped by what you eat, how you eat, and what you repeat every single day. The foods you choose can influence your blood vessels, how much sodium your body holds onto, your energy levels, your appetite, and even your long-term health trajectory. That means you have influence, not through extreme diets, not through perfection, but through small, consistent changes that your body can actually respond to. So the next time you build a plate, don't just ask, what should I remove? Ask a better question. What is my body missing that I can finally give it? Because sometimes improving your health isn't about restriction. It's about restoration, giving your body the nutrients it needs to function the way it was designed to. Cooked spinach, beans, a simple baked potato. Not complicated, not expensive, but powerful when used consistently. So start small, stay consistent, track your progress, and let time show you what your body can do when it finally has the support it's been missing. Comment 1 if you're committing to making one change starting today. And if this helped you, share it with someone who needs it. Because sometimes the simplest information can create the biggest change.